Hi there, this is Cindy Linden, and we're about to make some candy. I have been making this recipe for probably 20 years, and it started from something that I had seen and decided to try. And over time, I modified not the actual chemistry, because this is chemistry and it has to be done in a certain way or it isn't going to set right. I got some ideas about how to do it a little more easily. And I keep making it, sometimes even when I really don't want to make it, because people love this candy. I get more compliments and more requests for this than any other recipe that I make. And I ended up renaming my version of it Almond Addiction. And it's an almond toffee with chocolate that people really can't seem to stop eating it. If it's out, people continue to eat it. And that's probably because it's a combination of sweet and salty that is kind of irresistible. I'm gonna give you a couple of do-aheads to start with. And I've already done one of them because it's noisy. You're gonna take a 9x13 baking pan and line it with a long stretch of foil so that the foil goes out over the edge on the ends to kind of make handles so that you can pick the finished product up out of the baking pan when it's all done. And actually, if you're lucky, have a clean pan. The other thing you want to do ahead is heat your oven to 375. We need to toast some almonds. I'm going to keep talking at you for a little bit while you start some of those things. And if you need to pause me, you can go ahead and do that. In addition to the 9x13 pan, here are the things you're going to need. The foil, and you need some sliced almonds. I suppose you could use slivered almonds. I use sliced. We're going to chop them up anyway. I wouldn't use whole almonds because we need to toast them, and a whole almond wouldn't have enough surface to get the toast. You need a 2 to 3 quart heavy saucepan, your oven. We've already set that oven at 375. You need a cup of butter, which is 2 sticks, and if you have it, a candy thermometer. I'm sorry, this is kind of a picky recipe. I mean, it's not picky, it just uses a lot of tools. It's a little bit harder than some of my other recipes. It's mostly just that you have to watch it and you have to stir it more than anything else. And you have to measure stuff. You need sugar, regular plain old sugar. If you have a food scale, that's handy, but I'll tell you how to get around that in a minute. You need corn syrup. You need milk chocolate chips. You need a wood or a silicone spoon or stirring implement. And you need a microwave or a double boiler. See, it's a lot of tools. Sorry about that. I would say it's going to take us probably 10 minutes to do the prep, which is the foil, the oven, and toasting the almonds. It's going to take probably 20 minutes to cook. And then you got to let it rest a couple of times before you can do the finishing touches. Each of those times is probably 45 minutes worth. And you can speed that up, I guess, by putting it in the fridge. I do sometimes. Or you could just not be in a hurry and let it sit overnight even. It's not going to hurt anything to do that. To see the list of these tools before you start work, you can always visit the website, which is thecookalongpodcast.com. It'll show you the tools, it'll show you the ingredients, and it'll show you a picture of your finished product in case you want to see what it should look like, or if you want to just look at it and see if it tempts you enough to go ahead and make it. This particular recipe, I highly recommend measuring and setting everything out ahead of time. I am in the process now of measuring my sliced almonds onto a cookie sheet so I can put them in the oven and toast them. You need 1 3/4 cups. You might be tempted to use a small cookie sheet. If you have a bigger one, I would use the bigger one because if you can get it in a single layer, sorry, getting out my loud cookie sheet. If you can get it in a single layer, they'll toast faster. Once those almonds are spread out on your cookie sheet, you want to put them into a preheated 375 degree oven. And you're gonna cook them for 5 to 8 minutes. And just keep an eye on them. Just watch them so that they don't burn. This is a really easy thing to do. The only hard part about it is not letting them burn. I cannot begin to tell you how many times these suckers have burned at this stage and I have to start over. And of course, you know, nuts of any kind aren't cheap. I bet you I burn them almost half the time and have to start again. Get out 2 cubes of butter. That's 2 sticks. Each of them is a half a cup. You need a whole cup of butter. Into a bowl, measure 1 1/3 cups of regular granulated sugar. Into another bowl, measure 1 tablespoon of light corn syrup plus 3 tablespoons of water. those can just sit together. Most of these I'm asking you to keep separate because this is chemistry and candy doesn't work like other things where it'll come out sort of okay if you get the measurements a little wrong or the temperature a little wrong. Candy will not work if you don't get the chemistry right. So we have to set everything out and be ready to do things at the last minute. Don't let that intimidate you. It's really not going to be hard once you get everything set out. In another bowl, this is a bowl heavy recipe, you're going to want to put 8 ounces of milk chocolate chips. And if you don't have a food scale, which is obviously the most accurate way to get a measurement of 4 ounces, it's a scant 2/3 of a cup. So you can measure that into a bowl and then do that again. You need 2 identical bowls of 4 ounces of milk chocolate chips. Most people have semi-sweet chocolate chips around their house. You can use those. I live in a family who mostly prefers the darker chocolates. But on this particular recipe, for whatever reason, the contrast of the dark chocolate with the almond is not as seductive as the milk chocolate with the toffee. So I recommend the milk chocolate if you're willing to go to the store to get it. If not, go ahead and try your semi-sweet chocolate chips. You also have to have your pan out. And when we get the almonds out of the oven, we're going to divide those into 2 more bowls. Yes? It is a bowl heavy recipe. So go away, run away, come back when you're ready with your toasted almonds. And oh, there's one more thing you're going to need. You're going to need a way to chop up these nuts. I have a little nut grinder thing that I use where it grinds it down into a jar, but you can just use a rolling pin, place them on the cutting board and roll them out until they crumble into small pieces, or you can use a knife and chop them up. But we don't want them this full size. We want them in little tiny bits. So that's another do ahead. Once those almonds are spread out on your cookie sheet, you want to put them into a preheated 375-degree oven, and you're going to cook them for 5 to 8 minutes. And just keep an eye on them. Just watch them so that they don't burn. And we will start actually making some candy. All right, my almonds are toasted and I've ground them up in a little hand crank grinder. I recommend that you not use a food processor. You might be tempted, but you want to kind of a coarse grind on these, and a food processor is gonna smithereen it, so you don't really want that. And then I have to change something I told you earlier because I was mistaken. We're gonna divide the almonds a little differently than what I said. So you're gonna need 3 bowls for the almonds. That's the bottom line. You need 3/4 of a cup in one bowl. You need 2 half cups because it goes on each side of the candy once you're done. That's not really important that you keep that accurate because honestly a bunch of it's going to fall off when you make the candy anyway, and you're going to add whatever you have left over from the first batch to the second batch. So I'm going to go over those things once again. What I have in front of me here is a bowl of 1 1/3 cups sugar. I have a bowl that contains 1 tablespoon of corn syrup and 3 tablespoons of water. I have a bowl that contains 3/4 of a cup of sliced chopped toasted almonds. I have 2 more bowls of sliced chopped toasted almonds, each with a half a cup in them. And I have 2 bowls, each with 4 ounces of milk chocolate chips in them. You're also going to need your candy thermometer handy. And I actually don't use a candy thermometer. I use just a regular thermometer that shows you the degrees. So I could use it for meat. It's got a probe that I can stick into a roast, but I use the probe in the candy. There is another way to do this if you don't have a candy thermometer. For that, you'll need a glass of cool water set next to you. If you need to do this, it's fine. It is not as precise, and I can't promise that you'll get the kind of texture that you really want in this candy if you're using that method. But when it gets to the point where you think it's about ready, if you take a drip of the almond stuff we're about to make and drip it into the glass of cool water, and it separates into hard, brittle threads, it's an okay way of measuring if you don't have any other option. But I like the security of knowing that I see it hit 300 degrees, which is what we're aiming for here. So go ahead and put your 2 cubes of butter into the pan and turn your saucepan on to probably about medium high and let the butter melt. As soon as the butter has melted, we're going to start reaching for some of these other pre-measured ingredients. I I use a silicone spoon when I make this, or a silicone spatula. Either one is fine. You don't really need a spoon. You can also use wood. If you try to use a metal one, I think you're going to find that it gets too hot in your hand, and also that it isn't as good at scooping up some of the crystals that are going to form along the sides of the pan. You can leave me here. Go do your own thing watching that butter melt. It's not going to take too long. Come back to me as soon as it's all melted. All right, are you back? Got a pool of melted butter in front of you? Into that pool of melted butter, pour your bowl of sugar. All of it. Just pour it in. And you're done with that bowl. Into that same spot in the pan, pour your bowl full of water and corn syrup. Scrape it all out of there. The corn syrup's going to stick to the bottom. And then you stir it together, and then we wait. You need to keep stirring. This is the long part. I'm going to give you some tips. So when you see that it's turned to sort of golden brown and it's starting to smoke just a little bit, your thermometer is probably going to read 285 or so. The mixture is going to boil and bubble and steam while it's still kind of a butter yellow. It's going to turn a darker brown, and there will come a point when you think you're about to burn it. And that's when we do the next step. So have your thermometer handy and don't be afraid. Everything's going to be okay. Be sure your thermometer isn't touching the bottom of the pan. You want to measure the mixture's temperature, not the pan's temperature. Keep stirring, even with the thermometer in there, just sort of stir around it. Mine went from butter yellow to sort of butterscotch yellow, and now it's kind of the color of brown sugar. And it's telling me that the color of brown sugar happens at about 260 degrees. And again, I've got steam coming up, but not smoke. So we're still okay. I'm watching that thermometer. This is the slow part. The first part gets to like 250 or 60 degrees pretty fast. And sometimes after that, particularly in the last 15 degrees, it can take a long time. Okay, I'm at 280 now. It's going up pretty fast. Now it looks sort of like coffee with cream in it color. Oh my goodness, now it's at 293, gone back down. Okay, and it is starting to smoke a little bit. Back to 288. Like I said, this is the part where it takes a while. Don't be tempted to take it off early. You won't get what you want. All right, I got 300 degrees. If you don't yet, keep going. It needs to come off at exactly 300 degrees. And the minute you take it off, you take that 3/4 of a cup of almonds and you pour it in there and stir it up. You need to do that pretty quickly. And then you pour the whole thing once the almonds are stirred in. Yeah, boy, it's still smoking. Then you're going to pour it right into the foil-lined pan and let it sort of spread out. It's going to look kind of burned. Don't worry, it's really almost sort of chocolate color. Mine is right now. It's smoking like the dickens. I think I didn't get it off till about 2 degrees too late. And that can make it taste a little bit burned, but you know what? It isn't any worse for that. Okay, once it's in the pan, just sort of spread it out. Make sure it gets into the corners and that it's all about the same depth. And then here comes the part we just have to leave it alone for a bit. We're going to leave it for about 10 minutes. And then we're going to come back and we're going to slice it up a little bit. And that's not necessary. I do it because I can get sort of squares-ish that way, and because the pieces aren't too big or too small. You don't have to do that, but we'll come back in a few minutes and score it with something that might make it break more easily later. All right, off you go. This may take a little bit. Okay, here's the optional step. When you touch the candy and it still gives, but it's also not rock solid yet, you can take a chef's knife or a pizza cutter and score the candy. Now, that doesn't mean cut it all the way through. It means make a nice deep cut. You're going to watch it just sort of fade into itself. But I find that sometimes this encourages the candy later to break closer into squares. So what I've done is just made 5 cuts the short direction and 3 cuts the long direction, to make a total of 6 times 4, 24 pieces of candy. Again, that's an optional step because it will break later. It'll just be weird shapes, triangles and whatever, but you know what? It's gonna do that anyway. So do this if you feel like it, otherwise just skip it. And now we have to let the candy just sit. And it needs to be completely cool because we're gonna put some melted chocolate on it and we want that to, solidify when we do that. So let it sit until you can tell that it's completely cool. You can put your hand on it and there's no heat coming back. That's gonna be at least a half an hour, probably closer to 40 or 45 minutes. Go do something else now. We can't do anything to this candy. Come back to me when it's cool and I'll tell you the next step. Are you ready? You ready for the next step? I usually get really impatient. I just want it done. So here's the next thing you're gonna do. Be sure that one of your bowls of chocolate chips is in a microwavable bowl, and then you put it in your microwave and turn the power down really low. And what we have to do is just keep checking it because it can burn and we don't want it to do that. It can also go bad if there's any drop of water or anything in there, and you won't know that probably until it does it. It'll sort of go powdery and dry and burned. Anyway, we won't talk about that any further because that's not what's going to happen. Okay, so here we go. We're doing a minute on 3. I have a rubber spatula ready to test it. We want it to a point where it's melted enough to be spread over the top of the almond candy that we made. And then you're also going to want to have one of your half-cup bowls of chopped almonds handy. All right, here we go. Coming out of the oven, and I think, my guess is we're going to need to do that again. Yep, they're not ready, nowhere near. All right, doing that again. This is another thing I have burned. And when you're checking them, they need to be, the bottom ones should be melty. If the top ones aren't, don't worry about it because as you stir it with your spatula or your spoon, you're going to find that the heat from the melted ones takes care of the ones that haven't melted yet. And if you just stir it for a bit, it'll all melt. I think in order to make the painting of the chocolate a little easier, I'm now going to use the foil handles to lift my candy out of the pan. And I'm going to spread the foil out flat a little bit so I'm not trying to work around the edges of the pan. All right, here we go. Let's see how we've got this. Sometimes you can't even tell that it's melted because they look kind of the same. I'm just stirring the chocolate so that the bits that haven't melted yet do so. And when I've got it all smooth and there aren't any more lumps left in here anymore, yours will hopefully be ready also about the same time. We're just going to use the rubber spatula and scoop all of that out of the bowl and onto the top of the candy. And then use the rubber spatula to spread it around evenly. There we go. Okay, just spreading it. It's like frosting a cake. Don't let it get too thick. Don't let it get too thin. Take it all the way to the edges. Spread it as evenly as you can because it's about to be a kind of glue. I know that sounds appetizing, doesn't it? But it's true. Okay, so now you've got the chocolate. If you got the chocolate all spread around, just using my finger to scrape the spatula, okay? And then I use the spatula to scrape my finger. You know how that goes. Even if you don't do a lot of cooking, it's the thing that we all do. Now, I'm going to take one of those bowls of chopped almonds and sprinkle it over the top of this as evenly as I can. And then get ready with a spoon because we're going to try to smash some of this down in because there's nothing really to make the almonds stick except the chocolate, and we want the chocolate to be encouraged to hold on to it. So I use a soup-sized spoon and I just gently mash it into the chocolate. Be aware that this effort will be partly wasted because these are all not all, but a lot of them are gonna fall off when we do the next step. Patting them down in. Yes, some of them are sticking to the spoon. I don't really care. Most of them are staying where I put them. Okay, now comes another hard part. We have to wait again. And if you want to, you can speed this part up by putting it in the refrigerator. It's either gonna sit on your counter for probably another 40 minutes, half an hour anyway, or you're gonna put it in your refrigerator if you've got space for it. And that's what I'm gonna do because I don't like waiting. I may or may not have said that before. I'm not a really patient person when it comes to cooking. I want it now. And it's going into my refrigerator. Yeah, why don't you just do the same? There's no reason to wait unless you don't have any room in your refrigerator. And you can keep the bowl that you used earlier, because we're gonna do that again on the other side. So just let that sit around for a bit and come back to me when your chocolate is completely set. It's not shiny anymore. When you touch it, it doesn't come off on your finger. It's really like a hard chocolate chip would have been before we started melting it. When it's that hard, come back and we will finish this up. Now that your chocolate has cooled and is nice and hard, you want a piece of foil. Get a piece of foil that's about the same size as, well, a little bigger than the candy. About the same size you got before, or you could use wax paper. I'm gonna try wax paper today. And put it over the top of the candy. So you got this sheet of candy, you're putting wax paper over the top. Then you're gonna take the whole thing, holding the top sheet of foil or wax paper down and turn it over. That has to be done kind of quickly. Peel off the foil, and here's where you're gonna lose a lot of those almonds. It's just the way of things. Let it go. Don't worry about it. And my candy just broke in half. Right down the middle at one of my scores. I'm gonna push it back together for the purposes of what we have to do next, which is exactly what we did before with the chocolate and the nuts. Make sure there aren't any little pieces of foil that got left behind, and put your bowl of the second 4 ounces of chocolate in your microwave. This I'm gonna take it to 3, and I'm gonna do it a minute and a half this time. I had a little piece of foil stuck in a crevice, and I've pried that out. I've got my spatula ready to test the chocolate. Now I don't really need to go into a lot of detail on this next part, because all we're gonna do is what we've already done. You're gonna spread the chocolate so that the toffee doesn't show through. All right, did you get it all smooth? All right, now we pour that, scrape that out onto the toffee. Get it all out of the bowl. No sense wasting any. It's chocolate after all. Spread it around on the candy, and that's the end of the chocolate. And then you're going to use the last bowl of chopped almonds, and I'm sprinkling those over the top. And you're going to use a spoon again to press it down. And yet again, I'm going to just tell you, you're going to lose a lot of these. Don't worry about it, but do save it. Some of the chocolate's going to crack off. Some of the nuts are going to crack off. Put that over vanilla or chocolate ice cream. It's a great, quick dessert. I just keep my leftover chopped, the nuts that fall off. I keep them in a little container in my freezer. And then I have them whenever I might need them. Need, that's an interesting word. When this has cooled, and again, you need to let it cool until the chocolate is completely hardened, as in it's not shiny anymore and it doesn't come off on your finger when you touch it. At that point, you can start picking it up with your hands and breaking it apart. And then your candy needs to be stored airtight. It can be stored at room temperature, or you can freeze it. If you're making gifts, you can do that way ahead of time at the holiday season. You can just put them in their gift containers and stick them in your freezer if you have room for them. And then they're ready to go. They're not going to deteriorate while they're in the freezer. If you refer anybody to this, now that you've made it, you probably want to send them to the website, which is, again, thecookalongpodcast.com. And that will give them the do-aheads, which I've really spelled out there in terms of the foil and the nuts, and the ingredients list and the list of equipment you're going to need. For this kind of a recipe, I really recommend that you eye that carefully before you start. That's the end today. Thank you for joining me. Leave me comments on the recipe on the website, and let me know if there's something you'd especially like me to tackle on your behalf, and we can try that together. Meanwhile, happy cooking!